Today we're looking at workplace pensions. Most of you should have a workplace pension of some sort, and you might know it by a different name, whether it's a workplace pension, an occupational pension, a group personal pension, an automatic enrolment pension, or a work-based pension. But they're all essentially the same thing. If you are employed by a company and you meet certain criteria, that company is legally obliged to enrol you in a workplace pension and to pay contributions. But what are those criteria? Essentially, you must be classed as a worker, so you must have an employment contract and you must get financial gain or benefits in kind for the work or the services that you offer. You must be between ages 22 and state pension age. You must earn at least £10,000 a year, and you must usually work in the UK. If you meet all of those criteria and you work for an employer, then they should be offering you a pension scheme. If you have joined a new company, then you should be asked to enrol either immediately or after 3 months. Otherwise, if you've been part of a company for quite a long time, you should already be enrolled in that pension scheme, and you and your employer should be paying into it. But there are some circumstances where your employer doesn't have to offer you a pension. If you've handed in your notice or you've been asked to leave, then they're no longer obliged to offer you a pension scheme. If you have something called lifetime allowance protection, don't worry about this one, you'll know what it is if you have it, then your employer doesn't have to offer you a scheme. If you are from an EU member state and are in an EU cross-border pension scheme, then again, your employer doesn't have to enrol you. If you are in an LLP, a limited liability partnership, you don't need to be offered one. And if you're a director without an employment contract and you employ at least one other person, then again, you don't need to be enrolled in a workplace pension. Otherwise, if you meet all the other criteria that I spoke about before, you should be enrolled in a pension and you should be paying into it. You and your employer will pay in automatically, and there are minimum rates that should be paid in. These are percentage based and based on your salary, but your salary is quite a broad definition because for some people it would include their whole salary. For others, it might exclude commission or bonuses or things like that. And you can even use something called banded earnings, which is your salary above and below a certain limit. So it won't necessarily mean your entire salary is included. If you do want to know what definition your employer is using, then please do ask them. But the minimum amounts that are paid in are 5% by you and 3% by your employer. And you should see those appear on your pay slips if you are paying by something called salary sacrifice. Now, this brings me on to how you pay into your pension scheme. There are two different ways you can do it. The one I just mentioned is called salary sacrifice or the net pay arrangement. And what that means is you'll see this on your pay slips, but essentially your pension contribution gets taken right off the top of your salary as soon as you get paid. So you don't pay any tax on that amount of money and you don't pay any national insurance on it. That's how you get your tax relief in terms of a salary sacrifice contribution, because there's no tax, no NI paid on it. So you make a saving and it's paid straight into your pension scheme. You don't have to do anything about it. That's the most beneficial way for you and your employer to pay in, because you and your employer also make national insurance contribution savings, which doesn't happen if you do it the other way, which is called relief at source method. With the relief at source method, you get paid as normal, you get taxed and you pay national insurance on all of your earnings as you normally would, and then a pension contribution gets made to the pension provider. And the pension provider then says to the government, we've had this pension money, please give us some tax relief, basic rate tax relief only, on this amount of money. So basic rate tax relief is applied to everybody at 20%. So if you pay in £80, the government will top that up by £20 to £100. If you pay in £100, the government will top that up by £25 to £125, etc. But by doing it that way, the relief at source way, you can only get basic rate tax relief at source. If you are a higher or an additional rate taxpayer, you need to pay back the additional tax relief you are due either by writing to the government or by doing self-assessment tax returns each year. You don't need to do that with a net pay method, with the salary sacrifice method, because your pension contribution comes straight off the top of your salary. You're already saving the most amount of tax that you can save, so you don't need to worry about claiming anything back. In some circumstances, your employer can set up and enrol you in a workplace pension, but they themselves do not need to contribute. And those are only if you earn below certain levels. And those levels are £520 a month or less, £120 a week or less, or £480 over 4 weeks or less. Otherwise, your employer has to contribute into the scheme with you. When you get automatically enrolled, and as I said, it might be immediately or it might be after a deferred period of 3 months, which usually matches up with probation periods. But once you do get enrolled, you'll get a letter from your employer and from the pension provider stating the date that you joined, the type of pension that it is, what contributions will be received into it, what the investment strategy is, what to do if you want to leave the scheme, and how tax relief will be applied. You don't have to join a pension scheme if you don't want to. Your employer must offer you one, but you can opt out if you want to. Your employer cannot coerce you into opting out of a scheme for their financial gain. If they are, you need to speak to the pensions regulator about that, because that is absolutely against the rules. But that option is there if for whatever reason you decide not to opt in. But really, if you're after some free money into your pension from your employer and from the government, why wouldn't you? It's a great way to kickstart your pension savings. With a workplace pension, there are several protections in place. That means your money will be protected. It's not your employer that manages the pension, it's the pension provider. So if something happens to your employer and they go bust or they change hands, nothing will happen to your pension because that's managed by the pension provider, and so it's completely separate from your employer. They just pay into it for you. But if your provider goes bust, then what happens? Well, there's a scheme called the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, the FSCS, that steps in and protects up to 100% of your pension money. So there are protections available for providers as well, so don't worry about that. If you leave your employer at any point and for any reason, your pension simply goes with you. It's not left behind and it's not claimed by your employer. That certainly doesn't happen. You can take it along with you. You can move it to another provider if you want to. You can consolidate it into your new workplace pension if you want to do that. Or you can simply leave it as it is for the time being. It will remain invested if you do nothing with it, but it's worth checking where it is invested, because it's likely it's been invested in the default investment strategy, as most workplace pensions are. So if you've never had an input into the investments, it's worth having a look at this for your current and for previous workplace pensions, especially if you are keen to invest in ethical or sustainable investments. It's likely there will be an option to invest in a particular fund that meets those requirements, but it almost definitely will not be the default strategy that you will get thrown into when the pension is set up. So make sure you are happy with the investment options within your pensions. One thing you must make sure you do is to nominate beneficiaries. And again, this doesn't just apply to your workplace pension. You should do this with all of your pensions. This will be so that if you pass away at whatever age, the provider will have a record of who you want to nominate to receive your pension money. You can nominate absolutely anybody: spouses, children, charities, friends, anybody you want to, but you must make sure there's a written record on your file held by the provider, and that is usually done by something called an expression of wishes form or a nomination of beneficiary form. But make sure you do that, and you can update it at any point. Just make sure you keep it up to date if your situation changes. That's all, folks. I hope that's been helpful, and I'll see you next month.